Hello, sisters, and welcome to Go Solo Live. This is Jennifer Buchholz with Transform Via Travel. It's time to sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and enjoy my conversation with Leyla Alianek as she shares her adventures as a woman on the road.
Welcome to Go Solo Live.
Don't you mean Go Solo Live? Have you ever been asked, why on earth would you travel alone? Go Solo Live not only answers that question, but celebrates life as a midlife solo traveler. This is a safe place for women to come together to reminisce about their travels, encourage others to travel, and to dig into the real lessons learned from these journeys. Now join Jennifer Buchholz with Transform Via Travel as she and her guests share stories of the solo travelers of midlife women.
Joining me today is Leyla Alianek from Women on the Road. Welcome, Leyla.
Hi, so happy to be here.
Well, where are you joining us from today?
I am joining you from the depths of rural France, eastern France, just over the border from Switzerland.
And how did you wind up there?
I wish I knew. I was working in Geneva for a number of years, and I retired a couple of years ago. And because Switzerland is so expensive, a lot of people who work in Switzerland actually live in France. And I'm one of those people. I also happen to be a French citizen as well as a Canadian citizen. So that allowed me to stay here after retirement. So I'm close to my old working space and surrounded by bucolic hills and mountains of eastern France.
That sounds beautiful. And I have a dream of spending extended amounts of time in Europe because you just have so much access to all those different cultures while you're living there versus, traveling there and really being more on a time constrained type of adventure. So while you were living in France, where are some of your favorite places to go?
It's funny. A lot of people think, just to go back to Geneva for a second, a lot of people think that Geneva is really boring. But the most exciting thing about Geneva is that you can get out of it. Geneva has an EasyJet hub, and that's a discount airline that allows you to fly to something like 56 cities, and they're all within 2 hours. There's a couple that are 3 hours away. So it's very common for people who live in my area and who can afford it to be able to go to London for the weekend. I've gone to Paris for the day. So traveling out of the very, very heart of Europe is something that is wonderfully easy to do. Now, I've been trying to go to every major European city with an airport. I haven't quite made it yet, but I do tend to be drawn back to the places I know and love. I go back to Spain all the time. Madrid is one of my favorite cities in the world. I do travel through France quite a bit. Of course, I travel in Switzerland a lot. Italy's right next door, so that's what, a 3-hour drive to go to Turin, which is a city that I really enjoy. So it's really hard to narrow it down because everything is so accessible.
Well, so what brought you over to Europe? You said you had done some work over there. What brought you over to Europe as a living place?
I've been zigzagging all my life. I lived in Europe as a child, moved back to North America, moved back to Europe. It's just been a ping pong all my life. And this last time was sometime in the 1980s when I was transferred from a job. I was working as a journalist in Canada, and someone offered me a job in Geneva in communications. And I thought, wow, how exciting, Geneva. Yes, I'll take it. And it was only supposed to be for 18 months. So that was in 1984. So the best laid plans. And that's how I ended up living in Europe more or less permanently. Now, I haven't lived here nonstop since 1984. I have traveled extensively. I have lived in other places in other jobs, but this has been my home base since that time. Yeah.
So if you've been doing this for your whole life, zigzagging, I want to hear about some of the things that really stand out for you. And those can be both the good or the bad. Some people then start to wonder, does somebody take for granted this travel? So hearing those highlights and even the lowlights are important to share.
Well, if you're talking about the lifestyle itself, it has a lot going for it, and it's also got a lot against it. I mean, I grew up going to, I can't quite count, but I think I went to more schools than I had years of schooling. And each of those schools was in a different country. So there's some good and some bad to be said about that. I mean, the good is that it teaches you to become completely adaptable. What happens is that you learn how to jump into situations, size them up very quickly, and integrate yourself into them, which is why I became a journalist, I think, is that it was all about jumping into situations and trying to understand them as quickly as possible. And living the kind of life that I led trains you to do that. You get to meet a lot of people, but the downside of that is that you're always leaving the people that you get to meet. So that's always a little painful. But even as a child, I learned how to make friends quickly, become very, very sociable, because I didn't know whether my friends or my schooling was going to last a day, a week, a month. I had no idea how long that was going to stay. It's a great lifestyle for learning languages because my parents had a rather unusual approach to education. They always felt that I should be educated in the national language and school system of the country that we went to. So it didn't really matter that I had to take out a Spanish dictionary to do arithmetic problems when I was 7. I just had to learn. They threw me into a Spanish school and I had no clue. I didn't speak a word of Spanish. But 3 months later, I was absolutely fluent, and I still am to this day. So there's a lot to be said for this kind of lifestyle. On the other hand, there's the lack of roots. And I look at my friends who have friends from high school, from university, families, everything around them that's familiar. And I've never known that. I've always lived in a different place. If you ask me where I'm from, I have no idea. I can't even begin to tell you. I have 20 answers because what I really want to do is ask you, what do you mean by that question? So
isn't that fascinating?
Yeah. It's not necessarily an easy life, but it is such a fulfilling one, and it is so rich. And to be honest, I wouldn't trade my life with anyone else's, but sometimes it takes a little bit of managing.
Fair enough. So what has been when you're talking about the managing, talk to me about the logistics of living the life that you've been living.
Well, the logistics of moving from one country to another, they can be daunting depending on the country you're moving to. But in Europe, for example, living in Europe now is the easiest thing in the world. A lot of borders have disappeared. People move freely. There are hardly any logistics at all. It's like it used to be between Canada and the United States when you could drive across the border with a driver's license.
Right.
So those logistics they don't really come into play. Now, I have a lot of American friends who would love to move to Europe. That's a lot harder because what's happened with Europe is because there's so much freedom within Europe, there's a lot of borders around Europe. So getting into the sort of free zone is rather complicated. And so getting into Europe to work, it can be done. I have friends who have managed to get themselves some visas, some working visas in Europe, and they have jobs and they've done it. But it hasn't been easy. And in some cases, it's taken a year or two of real patience, because having to deal with authorities in a country like France, for example, is something that could really drive you to jump off a roof.
Absolutely. That sounds very challenging. And throughout my travels, I actually had looked at visas for spending a bit more time in like New Zealand or Australia. And I've aged out of those countries. What's she going to do? And then I encourage people who are much younger. I'm like, do it while you can, because who knows what, the next 10 years will bring in terms of borders or things like that. Even we would hope that it opens more up, but you never know. I know.
That's right. Unfortunately, the world looks like it's closing rather than opening. Borders are getting tighter. They're even in areas where you used to be able to go back and forth without any problem. Now you've got sort of new rules, new regulations. People are more afraid. You don't know who's going to come into the country, and the controls are just tighter than they used to be. It is changing.
So when we talk about travel, one of the things that I really like to spend some time on is the idea of safety. And I know that's something that's near and dear to your heart too, is making sure that women have safe solo travel experiences. Can you share any stories of situations that have piqued your anxiety as it relates to safety?
I'm one of these people who rarely travels without something happening.
Okay.
So, yeah, like trouble is my middle name. And wherever I go, there's usually either going to be a coup, a revolution, some major event, or I'm going to be drawn into situations that aren't common. It's very rare for me to be able to go on a trip, spend a week or two being a tourist, walking around, enjoying myself, and just come home and say, oh, that was great. I had a wonderful time. Most of the time, it's not like that. And yes, I have felt that my life was in danger a few times, and sometimes it's been my fault, and sometimes it really hasn't. I mean, as a journalist, I was a journalist during the late 70s and the 80s, and I did travel to war zones, and I have been shot at, and those are not things that I particularly enjoy. So, no matter what you do in situations like that, there's very little you can do to protect yourself other than not go. So I do get questions from a lot of people about traveling to dangerous places. It sounds so romantic. Well, there's nothing romantic about getting shot. There's nothing romantic about getting killed. So, if it's excitement you're looking for, maybe just go to a really exciting movie or something. This is, traveling to a dangerous country is not, to me, something exciting. Now, beyond countries that are in actual conflict is a whole second sort of layer of countries that I love going to, and that do require a certain amount of independence and sort of can do. And these are countries that are just out of conflict situations. I mean, I went to Mozambique and to Eritrea, two African countries, just after they had ended huge civil wars. I'm just back from Colombia. Now, Colombia has a peace process that's been going on for just over a year now. So countries like that are coming out of conflict situations and which haven't yet become complete tourist magnets where you've got a tour group on every corner. Those are countries that most women can travel to relatively safely with a little bit of savvy and some research. And then, of course, there's the breadth of countries, which are the countries that most of us travel to, and the countries that, do their promotion and that have wonderful beaches and that have great culture and that attract us all, the countries that we all want to go to. Those countries present a completely different kind of safety scenario. In those countries, you're looking at big cities. Safety in big cities is pretty much the same around the world. You're not going to be in any greater danger in a big city in Asia or in South America than you are in a big city in North America. So,
agreed.
Yeah. So primarily, I mean, I think staying safe is partly luck, because you can't downplay the fact that, yes, you could be in the wrong place at the wrong time. There's nothing you or anyone else can do about that. But assuming that you are not in the wrong place at the wrong time, use your common sense, the same common sense that you use when you walk out your front door. Do you look left and right when you're going to cross the street? You do, right? So you do the same thing when you're someplace else. In your own hometown, do you go to sleazy parts of town at 2:00 in the morning by yourself? Do you go to bars that you wouldn't dream of going to with friends by yourself just to see what they're like? I mean, of course you don't. And you wouldn't do that when you're traveling either. And the same rules apply. I think where the difference comes up is in certain cultural constructs in some countries where you do have cultures that are not so accepting of solo women. Cultures where the mere fact of being on your own sends a message that it wouldn't send at home. And it might send a message that, hey, I'm easy, or I'm here for the picking, or actually the reason that I'm here is because I want you to walk over to me and talk to me. Well, these are not things that we as Westerners, and I throw myself into that even though I'm only half a Westerner, but they're not the kinds of things that we would normally interpret in the same way as they're presented. So yes, in countries where society is very different and looks at women differently, you might put yourself in jeopardy, mostly through ignorance, because you don't know what you're looking at in a certain situation. But a little bit of research should fix that too. I mean, if you're going to a country that has a decidedly male culture or where women are disrespected, you're gonna do things a little bit differently than you would do them if you were in a North American suburb at 2:00 in the afternoon. So
Exactly.
the research is really important. Know what you're getting into. And so if you use your common sense, do your research, and have a good sense of what you're actually getting into, those are the things that are going to keep you as safe as you possibly can be. There's no 100% guarantee anywhere, not traveling, not at home.
Yep. Well, and those are all great tips. It it is just that same thing. I find that some people like to think that maybe when they travel they're invincible, and you know you're not wearing any sort of invincibility shield when you're traveling. So as long as you are using your common sense and really following the same types of things you would at home or in a large city or things like that, it's not complicated, and it's still ironic that this becomes a topic of conversation.
Well, unfortunately, things happen. I mean, they happen even in safe places. Thailand, which is supposed to be a relatively safe country, you do hear of women and girls, being victims of crime there. It happens. You hear of these things happening everywhere in the world. In some parts of the world, they're a little more unexpected. If you go to a relatively safe place and something happens, it's a little more shocking.
Right.
You're a little surprised that it happens. But nonetheless, these things happen absolutely everywhere. And if you went to Colombia at the height of the FARC conflict and went up into the mountains by yourself and got kidnapped, well, yes, that's what was happening at the time. And a little bit of research might have told you that it is best not to go up into the mountains in an armed conflict by yourself. So
Exactly.
these are the things that you can actually control. Although you can't control the outcome, you can control the bit that led you to it.
Well, actually, I love that you're using Colombia as an example. I was in Bogota 2 years ago and then last year. And so it was pre-treaty and post-treaty, and certainly not in any sort of harm's way. I was there to teach. And I've had a very enjoyable time learning more about that country and, understanding their peace process, their treaty process, and feeling the emotion of the young people and honestly the young urban dwellers as they were going through the voting and things like that. It was quite fascinating. So, going in with your eyes open and with legitimate curiosity is an important part of this process as well, because to hear from the locals, how that process is and what's important to them and why. It's not what you're getting on the news.
It's interesting because I was in Colombia a week ago, and I spent most of my time in rural areas. And the big complaint, of course, of people in rural areas was that the people in the cities didn't know what they were talking about,
Hmm.
and they weren't really thinking of the kinds of lives that peasants had in the countryside. They were much more worried about fixing potholes in Bogota rather than understanding that people in the countryside didn't actually have enough to eat. So this big, huge divergence between the rural and the urban areas. But also, you asked me a question earlier, and I don't really think I answered it. You were asking me about times when I had been really afraid or scared when I was traveling, when we were talking about safety. And two events come to mind just because they really marked me about how you can end up in the strangest circumstance, in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it really isn't that much of your doing. One of them was partly my doing. I was in Mozambique and I was traveling to a national park with a park ranger, and somewhere along the line he lost the road and we got lost in a minefield. And that was very scary because when you're lost in a minefield, you don't know where the mines are, and whether you move forward or backward or sideways, you might just get blown up. And so that was a horrible experience.
Yeah, I would say.
But it was also partly my fault. I mean, what was I thinking going there? I was going there to write a story, but yeah, still. So, I could have gotten myself out of that one had I simply not gone and done that story. But there was another event, and this one I can't really say was my fault. And this was in the Amazon rainforest in Brazil. I was doing a story on indigenous religions, and I was with a group of indigenous men. I was all by myself. And clearly I wasn't keeping up with them the way they wanted me to keep up. And, I'm not the most athletic person at the best of times. And so finally, one of them just turned around, looked at me, shoved a rifle in my hands, and they all took off. And that was it. They left me.
It's like, good luck.
Rainforest. Like, how do you even hold this thing? I don't do firearms. I have no idea
Yeah.
what to do with it. I wouldn't know how to use it other than to swing it at somebody's head if they came after me. And I was alone. And all of a sudden, here I am in the middle of, what is probably the largest rainforest in the world, thinking that they have abandoned me. They've gone. And so I started walking, and after about an hour, I found a little clearing with a boy and a girl who were, maybe 7 and 10. and they didn't speak any language I could speak.
Oh,
I had no
wow.
idea what they were saying. They had no idea what I was saying. I tried to act out, as in charades, a steering
Yes.
wheel, a car, a road, trying to find a road. They just absolutely did not understand. And I
Wow.
spent about 6 hours there coming to terms with the fact that the life that I had as I knew it was probably about to end. And that I hoped that they had parents, that maybe adults were going to show up and help. I had no idea. And then all of a sudden, these guides that had been with me just before sunset showed up as though nothing had happened and said, okay, we're back, let's go. I could have killed them. But that was so scary because I thought that that was it. I was
Right?
going to be in the Amazon rainforest with two kids who didn't speak a language that I knew for the rest of my life. It was horrible.
Wow.
So those are two events that have really marked me. But again, who knew? I mean, really, you don't go into a situation planning that something odd like that is going to happen to you. So, you just have to, I guess, move forward with it. I mean, I was already making plans about how I was going to survive in the rainforest. Now, I'm very grateful that I didn't have to put any of them into action.
Right. Right. And in some cases, there are plans and preparation that we can do to be ready for some of the unexpected. But I would say that being in a rainforest, just being armed with a rifle is just not in my realm of imagination for anything that I could actually expect.
But I have a history of having firearms shoved into my hands. It was Uganda, and I was with a scientist, and we were going up to look at the gorillas. And again, it was one of those situations where I think I was just going too slowly for him. And
Yes.
we were in an area where he had just finished telling me that there were 32 wild elephants in this area that we were in, which is not a comforting thought at the best of times. And he shoved a rifle into my hands and said, just follow the path. I looked down, I couldn't even see the path. He said, just follow the path. You'll get back to the station and I'll meet you there. And he took off. So this isn't, I mean, there must be something about me that attracts the idea of people shoving rifles into my arms.
That's unusual.
I know, I know, I know.
Huh.
I
Okay.
told you things happened.
That's pretty funny though. I mean, again, you continue to put yourself in some very interesting situations. So, I'm curious, when you think about the learnings, the lessons that you've had, we've talked often those lessons are coming through those crazy, challenging encounters. Um, you know, what are some of the lessons that you've learned that you now put into action when you're traveling in the future? And certainly ones that you're sharing with your followers on your website.
I think maybe the biggest lesson that I've learned is to say yes. I used to say no a lot. I used to worry and think, oh, well, I've been invited to this wedding, but I won't know anyone and I don't know how to behave and it's a completely different culture. And, maybe I'll just lie in bed in the morning and not get up and take a morning off or something. There were always excuses to say no and not try something. And over time, over travels, I've learned to say yes. So my default now is, would you like to? Yes, I would. Now, sometimes I regret that yes, but that is my default answer. So I think if you don't open yourself up, if you don't go towards whatever is coming towards you, then you're going to probably be missing a chance. Of course, you have to be careful. Would you like to jump off this bridge without a parachute? No, of course not. But if it's an experience that you haven't had and that seems as though it's not going to kill you, then why not simply say yes and experience it? And I think another lesson that I've learned that comes from that one is learning to discover how different we all are and how similar we all are. With more and more walls being built between people, there's such a us and them mentality that's starting to take hold. And really, when you start traveling and seeing a lot of places, there is no us and them. It's all us. We are all pretty much the same. The women I meet in different countries, they could be farmers, they could be doctors, they could be teachers, they could be absolutely anything. They have the same preoccupations as I do. It's The people who have more money have more things, do more things with it. The people who have less money have to work harder to feed their children, educate their children. But those concerns are universal. They're not particularly different in one place than another. The one area where you do find that, people are different is when they've been hugely displaced, when they're refugees, when they're in a situation of conflict, then their considerations and their concerns change.
That makes
But
sense.
even so, if you were in that situation, you would be just like them. So we are not different one from another. And it just irritates me to no end to see all this, blah, blah about, them and they're different and they're dangerous and we're not and we're great. I mean, it is not like that. The world isn't like that. And the more you travel, the more you see that it's not like that. And I think people who don't see the world and who don't know the world are the ones that are going to end up being the most narrow-minded because they're speaking from a place of ignorance. So that's another thing that I've learned is that I am absolutely no different and I'm certainly no more special than anyone else that I meet out there. I think we all have our things that we bring to our cultures and our things that we can bring to the world. But deep down inside, it's like looking in a mirror.
Well, it is. And there should be so much more conversation about we than, you or us and them. And when you travel and then take time to understand what's happening wherever you are, if you're looking for differences, you'll find them. And if you're looking for commonalities, you'll find them. And I find just talking to women, and not saying that I don't enjoy having conversations with local men as well, but the conversations with women can be so powerful because especially in this group, whether you're mothers or sisters or friends, there are so many things that we can find that we have in common when we're looking for it. And they also are a source of people that we can trust in general, not always, of course, but in general to say, where should I go? Where should I not go? What do you recommend? They can provide a lot of great insight and information that we can use to enrich our travels as well.
Absolutely. I know that when I travel, I often seek out women. I try to visit projects that are run by women. I speak to women in markets. I speak to everybody. I speak to women in shops. I talk to women at bus stops. I'm just curious. I'm curious about how they live. And this is, to me, this is one of the easiest ways to break into a society. I mean, sometimes they end up taking you home. I've been invited to dinners. I've been invited to spend a week, a month even in one case in somebody's house that I'd only met casually. But it's also a window into society because women are the keepers of that society. So when you start getting to see a certain culture through the eyes of its women, you're starting to understand that culture. And it doesn't always work that way. I mean, I would like to say that women are always your best protectors. If something happens to you on the street, run towards the women. That's standard advice. It'll work part of the time. Unfortunately, women also are human beings and will sometimes look for self-preservation and will not always be available to help you, just like men. So, we can't generalize. But
Exactly.
By and large, I think that getting to know the women in a society is going to help you understand that society better.
Absolutely. So one of the most impossible questions that exists in my world is, where is your favorite place to go? However, I like to ask it just in case it inspires. So I don't expect well-traveled people to narrow it down to one place. And certainly there's if I want this kind of adventure, this is where I'm going to go. But do you have a couple at the top of your list or certainly places that you'd like to go back to?
Well, other than Spain, because that's where I was brought up as a child, go back to no. I'm a discoverer. I love going to places I don't know. If I look at my last few major trips, where did I go? I went to Colombia, South Korea, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Kenya, which I had been to before, but I went back in a different way than I'd seen it last time I was there. So it really is a question of discovering places that I haven't been to. And my favorite is usually the one that I've just been to and that I'm busy writing about because I'm so taken with it. Like right now, I'm writing all about Colombia. So I'm completely in Colombia. I'm in Colombian mode. I'm listening to Colombian music. I'm drinking Colombian coffee. So that is my all-time favorite country. Now, I'll go to another country afterwards, and that will become my favorite country. I still love Colombia.
You're fickle.
And no, I love them all. There's room in my heart for every single
Fair
country
enough.
I've ever been to.
So when you think about the travel, one of the things that I spend some time with is about the personal growth that you get as a traveler, especially as a solo woman traveler. Is that something that resonates with you? Is the idea of when you go, you grow?
Oh, absolutely. There's no question. I mean, I have a lot of women readers who write to me before they go somewhere on their own and then who write to me after they come back. And all I have to do is listen to them. It's not what I think, it's what they think. I mean, before they go, it's, oh, I can't possibly do this. I can't go on my own. I won't know what to do. What if, what if, what if? And then 3 months later, I get a note saying, you know what? I'm so glad I did it. Now I'm preparing my next solo trip. I can't wait to be gone again. I feel so empowered. I feel so able to do it all. It really does empower you to be able to handle things that are foreign and things that are different on your own. Because let's face it, when you're traveling by yourself, there isn't anybody to help you. There's nobody to watch your suitcase when you have to go to the bathroom. There's nobody you can send in ahead of you to negotiate the price of a hotel. There's no one who's going to translate the menu for you. Not that somebody ever would do those things, but somehow it's less intimidating when there are two of you. You're just on your own, and if you don't want to go into that restaurant by yourself because you're shy, well, you're not going to eat. Or you'll have to go to the supermarket and survive on peanut butter and tuna fish for the rest of your trip. So you just better get yourself together and do it. Go in there. Don't be afraid, because you don't have that much of a choice if you want to continue your trip. So what happens is you do it. You do it the first time, it's terrifying. You do it the second time, it's less terrifying. The third time, it's okay. And the fourth time, you're actually enjoying yourself. So what have you done? You have empowered yourself. All of a sudden, you've taken a situation that you were fearful of, that you didn't think you could handle, and that scared you, and you're actually feeling good about it. So that is a tremendously empowering thing. And then there's all the learning. I mean, when you're by yourself, you're forced to learn. You have to ask questions, you get answered. You become a different person when you travel on your own, especially if you're traveling for the longer term. But even the shorter term brings you, all sorts of different possibilities that would not happen. My favorite one is meeting people. When you travel with one person or with a group of people, it becomes very almost incestuous. You're talking to that person or you're talking to that group. All your interaction happens with that group because you have no need to go beyond your immediate circle to find any kind of social interaction. When you're traveling by yourself, comes a day where you're sitting there looking at your 28th sunset by yourself. And you're thinking, you know what? I would really like to, oh, look, a person.
Squirrel.
Hey, don't you think that sunset is beautiful? Come over
Yep.
here. Look, I've got a great view. And next thing you know, you're talking to somebody. So it forces you out of your shell and you get to meet people that way, because otherwise you're just going to talk to yourself in the mirror. So I think that really helps too, because when you go to a country, unless you just want to go sit on a beach somewhere, in which case it doesn't really matter. But if you're actually going to a country because you want to discover the country, you want to get to know it,
Yep.
then, getting out of that sort of immediate shell that you're in is one of the most important things you can do. Now, I'm not saying that everybody who travels with a partner or who travels with other people builds that kind of wall around them and doesn't interact. No. I've seen plenty of people who travel with others and who do make an effort to interact with people locally, but you're not as tempted to. You're
Right.
not pushed into it. You don't have the sort of basic visceral need to connect because you're already connected with some people. So I think that this is an amazing sort of byproduct of solo travel, because it opens you up to new people. So it opens you up to new cultures. And as a result, it opens you up to the world.
So tell me, when you travel, do you prefer to have a structured plan and agenda or unstructured? What does your balance of that look like for you, and why?
Well, my balance is about 50-50. I either have an absolute immutable plan, something that cannot be shifted, or I land and I may have my first night's hotel booked and that's it. Now, remember, for example, when I went to South Korea, I had an itinerary because I had a limited time and there were a lot of things I wanted to see. And normally I travel for longer, but in this case, I traveled for 2 weeks. And the only way I was going to get around to see everything I wanted to see was if I had some sort of a plan. So at least I had an itinerary. I may have had one or two hotels booked ahead of time when I arrived in a city late at night. But that was pretty much it. I think I got a city pass for Seoul or something. It's about as far as I went. Other times I arrive somewhere and I have absolutely no clue of what I'm going to do. I'll have that first night booked, and then I'll probably start opening my guidebook on the plane. This is how bad it gets sometimes. Just because I'm busy and I've been writing, I've been on assignment, I haven't had a chance. What I do try to do before going to a country is read literature.
Okay.
So I try and read 2 or 3 books written by authors of the country, not history books, not culture books, but actual novels, literature from that country, so that I'll get a feeling for the country's cadence. I'll get a feeling for how it portrays itself, what it wants to show the world. And that often serves me better than any kind of guidebook, which is simply going to tell me where I should go eat. And I can figure that one out on my own.
Absolutely. I love it. So that balance, I think, is very important. And I do really love having that unplanned downtime just for whatever possibilities that may come up.
You know, the first thing I do when I get to a new city is I hop on the bus. This is my one
Mhm.
big favorite thing to do. I just get on a local bus and I see where it takes me. And sometimes it doesn't take me into places that I really want to go to. So I just stay put and come back. But other times it takes me into neighborhoods that I would never have known existed if I'd followed a guidebook, because they're residential neighborhoods or they're artist neighborhoods or they're industrial neighborhoods, which may not have any interest to the average tourist. So I love doing that. And I might spend half a day, sometimes even an entire day, riding around on buses.
Absolutely. I love that. I'm a bus person and I also love doing walking tours. That's one of my
I
ways
like
to get
those
used to
too,
that.
especially walking tours that involve eating. Those are my absolute favorite.
Agreed. By the way, if you to get back to Bogota, there's a lovely gentleman who originates from Australia who does the most amazing food tours in Bogota. And we had a great time with him. I made the arrangements for all the faculty who were in town for our training, and we ended up going to the variety of restaurants on the food tour on the same day as the flower delivery day. And Colombia is one of the biggest exporters of flowers. And so we got to see this marketplace just full of flowers in full bloom. It was surprising and stunning and amazing and wonderful.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. What
So,
I did was I went on a walking tour of coffee houses
mm,
run by, I think it's called Flavors of Bogota, and a woman who's actually written a book called um, S- How to Slurp or something like that. It's absolutely fascinating on how you actually drink coffee. There are ways of drinking coffee and tasting coffee just like wine. So I had no idea about any of this. So that was fascinating too. But I think the food tour would have been nice. I didn't stay long enough. And unfortunately, when you travel, this is always the thing, is that there are 500 things to do and you only have time for 50.
yes, it's just how it is.
I
So,
know.
ironically, my approach is that I figure I'm always going to go back somewhere, that I don't have to try to cram it all in because I figure I'll go back. I don't know if that'll actually ring true, but I think that's what leaves me hope of not trying to feel so rushed and take the time that I need to enjoy.
And I would feel that way too, except I'm 65 years old, or I'm going to be 65 in a few months. So my window of opportunity for going back to places is slightly narrower than yours.
Got it.
So I think that I need to get out there and see as many countries as I can. I think I'm up to about 86 now. Not that I'm counting or anything, but I do have this little thing. I would like to get to most countries in the world. I don't think that's going to be possible, but I can keep trying. And I enjoy traveling so much that I love discovering. I love going to places that I haven't been to before. So it's always that pull, right? Do you go back to the place that you love and you know is great? Or do you go to a new one? It's like going to a restaurant. Are you going to order the thing that you always order there because you know it's good and you love it? Or are you going to take a risk and try something new?
Exactly. And I think that that is kind of where we should wrap up for today. This has been such a pleasure, Leyla. I would like to make sure that our listeners know where to find you for additional, connection.
Oh, yes, please. Just join me on Women on the Road. That's all you have to do. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on wherever it is that I'm supposed to be as Women on the Road. And just come and drop in on the website and drop by on Facebook, especially. There's
Perfect.
a lively, active community there, and we'd love to have you.
That sounds wonderful. Well, thank you again so much for your time in joining us today and sharing your travel stories. It has truly been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Wasn't it great to hear the stories that Leyla shared with us today? I found it fascinating the number of times she would travel and end up with a rifle in her hand unexpectedly. If you love these stories and want to help support Go Solo Live, we have a site where you can do that at www.patreon.com. That's patreon.com/Go Solo Live. If you make a small contribution to the show, there are options for some great gifts of appreciation. We've reached the end of another episode, but the conversation doesn't have to end there. Follow us on Twitter at Go Solo Live, and don't forget to tweet me if you're interested in being a guest on the show. Until next time, remember, go solo, not alone.